Did you know that the wrist performs over 5,000 movements a day, from holding a phone or typing or doing some push-ups? It's one of the most strong and flexible, but yet fragile joints in your body. But when it starts hurting, it suddenly feels like everything becomes a challenge, from brushing your teeth or opening a jar. I'm Dominic, and today we're diving into one of the busiest joints in the upper limb, the wrist. Let's Physiofy this together. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of PhysioTalks with Dom. I hope you're healthy, confident, and most importantly, being active. Today, you understand how the wrist works, why it hurts sometimes, and without any confusion, I will share some quick tips how to make it feel better. Okay, now let's begin with the basic anatomy. Let's get started though from the forearm. The forearm has two bones, as we previously mentioned in the elbow joint video, the radius and the ulna. The radius is on the thumb side and the ulna from the pinky side. Between them and your hand sit some bones which work like puzzle pieces. These bones are called the carpal bones. These little bones work together, allowing you to move your wrist in bending, extending, twisting, and generally move smoothly. The carpal bones have two rows, the first and the second. On the first row, we'll have the scaphoid, the lunate, the trigetrum, and the pisiform. On the second row, we'll have the trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate bone. Of course, you don't need to memorize them all. You just need to understand that these bones are very important for your wrist to be healthy, because without them, you will have trouble on moving your wrist. Kinesiology simply means how it moves. The basic movements of the wrist joints are four: the flexion, the extension, the radial deviation, and the ulnar deviation. When you combine them all, you get these little cycle movements, which you do it every day, from waving hello, holding a phone, typing, doing push-ups, or writing. It's a small joint, but it handles a lot of things. Now let's move to the most common conditions of the wrist joint. In the first category, we have the tendinitis conditions. In the first place, let's name these tendinitis so you don't get confused and you know what we're going to talk about. The decurvent syndrome, the extensor tendinitis, and the flexor tendinitis. Of course, we are not going to cover all conditions of the wrist joint, but the most common, as I said before. So what is tendinitis? Tendinitis simply means when a tendon gets angry and swollen after doing too much at the same motion. It usually feels sore or sharp when you move, especially on activities of daily living like lifting, typing, scrolling, and all the good stuff. Now let's analyze the tendinitis conditions. The decurvent syndrome or tendinitis. The decurvent syndrome happens on the thumb side of your wrist. It affects tendons that help you move your thumb up and out. Like for example, when you pick up your phone or lift up your baby. You might feel pain when you twist your wrist or making a fist with your thumb inside. Fun fact, it's often in new parents that sometimes is called mommy thumb. Now let's move to the extensor tendinitis. The extensor tendinitis occurs especially on the extensor of the forearm, which are responsible for extending your fingers and wrist. The extensor tendons can get sore from activities like working for many hours with a mouse or lifting and typing. You might feel pain when you extend your wrist or finger. Even holding your phone for a long time can cause this problem. As we mentioned in the previous video about the tennis elbow, this condition can cause tennis elbow because this movement affects also the lateral epicondyle, which inflammation in this point is called a tennis elbow. Now let's move to the opposite one, the flexor tendinitis. The flexor tendinitis, as you might guess it, is the flexion of the wrist, especially the forearm muscles, which I'm not going to get you into confusion with all the names because here there is a lot of muscle. So with no any confusion, let's move on. The tendons there help you bend your wrist and gripping things. They can get irritated when you overdo it with squeezing, gripping, lifting, and holding for a long time. It feels like a deep ache in the front of your wrist that gets worse when closing your hand. Fun fact, it's often seen in people who play with rackets or lifting weights. And also in this condition, we have of course to mention the opposite of the tennis elbow, as we said in the previous video, the golfer elbow. Because when you do a long time this movement and under a lot of pressure, you can irritate the opposite epicondyle, the medial epicondyle. The second category of the common conditions of the wrist joints are the fractures. Simply a fracture, as you might guess it, is when a bone breaks. Usually happens after a strong impact or a fall. As we mentioned before, your wrist has the carpal bones, so there are a few ways this could happen. Fracture number 1, the distal radius fracture. What is the first thing you do when you are about to fall on the floor? Of course, you extend your arm and you want to prevent that impact from falling. But that impact absorbed on your wrist causes the distal radius fracture. Specifically, the radius, as I mentioned before, is from this side, and when you fall and you prevent and you stop yourself from falling, this pressure can cause the distal part of your radius. It hurts, it swells, and of course, sometimes your wrists can get deformed. Fun fact, this type of fracture, it's called Colles fracture, which is very common in adults and elderly people. Fracture number 2, the scaphoid fracture. The scaphoid bone is the first bone from the first row of the carpal bone, and it breaks specifically and usually in the same way like the distal radius, because when you fall down and you absorb the whole impact on your wrist, in this position the distal part of the radius hits on the scaphoid bone and breaks it. Fun fact, in the first X-ray, this fracture is not so visible, so doctors have to check it again later. Now I have to, of course, to mention the opposite of the Colles fracture. It's called the Smith fracture, which is caused, of course, by a fall, but in the opposite way. Especially when you fall down, sometimes you don't have the time to hold yourself like this, and you fall down like this. When you fall down and get the impact in this position, can cause the distal part of the radius. Very superficial mentioning that the Colles and the Smith fracture, they differ also in the application of the gist cast after the fracture. For example, if the fracture happened in this position, it's called the Colles fracture, and the cast is applied in the opposite way. If it happens the Smith fracture in this position, the gist goes in the opposite way. So enough said about the Colles and the Smith fracture. Let's move on the next one. Less common, but any of the other carpal bones can break on any kind of accident or fall. On which bone is affected can be caused swelling, stiffness, and pain. So now let's move on the third subcategory of the common conditions, the dislocations. A dislocation happens when one of the wrist bones pops out from its location. It's very rare, but when it happens, it's very painful and gets swollen. Let's start with the first dislocation, the lunate dislocation. After a very, very strong impact, can pop out from its location. It's rare, but could happen. If it happens, it becomes swollen and very painful. Let's move now to the second dislocation, the perilunate dislocation. This condition occurs when all the carpal bones except the lunate dislocate. When the lunate stays in place, but all the other carpal bones move out of place. It's even more complex than the lunate one. You will feel severe pain, swelling, and weakness. It's an emergency and must be taken care of by a professional. Now let's move on the fourth subcategory of the common condition of the wrist joint. A sprain means when the ligaments which hold the wrist bones together gets stretched or toned. It usually happens when you fall down and your wrist bends too far. You will feel pain, swelling, and weakness, but the bones are fine. Fun fact, mild sprains can heal by themselves, but more severe ones need some attention and might need some physiotherapy. Let's move now to the strains. A strain affects muscles and tendons, usually from overuse or lifting something very heavy. It feels like a dull, pulling pain, and it gets worse when you move or grip something. Now let's move to the final subcategory of the common conditions, the carpal tunnel syndrome. The median nerve gets squeezed out as it passes through a narrow tunnel in your wrist. You will feel tingling, numbness, or weakness, especially in the thumb, the index, and the middle finger. It's super common to people who work a lot with a mouse, type a lot, or working with a vibrating tool. Fun fact, shaking your hand can help you for some seconds, but then when you stop shaking, that pain comes back. And let's go to the next chapter of the wrist joint, the physiotherapy and mobility. Of course, just to let you know, these exercises are not about to replace the classical physiotherapy. If you have any problem, one of these severe conditions, please visit a doctor or physiotherapist directly. Prevention over therapy. Prevention always comes first. Physiotherapy is not there to get you scared. It's there to treat you, to inform you, and to get you back to your daily activities. So, trust the process. Now that we know how the wrist works and what can go wrong, let's talk about physiotherapy and how we can fix it. First things first, keep it moving. Mobility. When your wrist is still painful, the first is to get it moving, but gently. We start with small cycles, slow wrist bends. Think it like you put some grease on a hinge to move it better. Next step of the physiotherapy and mobility, build your support system, the strength. Once the wrist starts moving again, we make it stronger. We use light resistance bands, squeezing soft balls, or doing some wall push-ups. The goal is to train all the small muscles that keep your wrist steady. So next time you lift, type, or train, it's ready for the job. At last, use it in a smart way. Awareness. And this is where physiotherapy shines. We teach you how to use your wrist properly, how to keep it in neutral position when you're typing, how to lift without overbending, or how to stretch after long hours of work. That's a way how to stop pain from coming back. It's about moving, strengthening, and re-educating your wrist. And not only your wrist. As I always say, motion is lotion. Now let's move to the myth busting. Myth number 1, if it hurts, don't move it. Not true. Actually, gentle movement can heal your condition faster. Myth number 2, cracking your wrist gives you arthritis. Nope, that popping sound is just gas bubbles in your joint. It doesn't cause arthritis. But it's not healthy though. Try to avoid it. Disclaimer, the cracking in your spine is completely different. That's healthy. Myth number 3, all wrist pains means carpal tunnel syndrome. Wrist pain isn't always carpal tunnel syndrome. It can also come from tight forearm muscles, poor posture, or even shoulder and neck imbalances that affect how your wrist moves. So now you know, your wrist might be small, but it's one of the hardest working joints in your own body. Keep it mobile, keep it strong, and we keep supporting you, whether you're training, typing, or gripping something heavy. I'm Dominic, and this was another episode of PhysioTalks with Dom. Till next time, let's Physiofy this together.